Welcome to my channel. This is Bruce the Boss, and today's story: Whoopi Goldberg gets suspended for a couple of weeks from ABC's The View for controversial statements she made on Monday as it pertains to the Holocaust. But before we get into that, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Your subscriptions go a long way with allowing me to produce and or make and put out new content. Now let's get into it. Now, unless if you've been living under a rock, on Monday the ladies of The View were having a conversation about a book that was possibly getting banned in public schools called Mouse, in reference to the Jewish Holocaust during Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 1940s. And Whoopi made a comment that has been deemed to be very controversial. Take a listen.
If you're going to do this, then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race. No, it's not about race.
No, it's about
a different race. But it's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's about.
But it's about white supremacy.
It's not about
ideal race.
But these are two white groups of people.
Now, as a result of those statements and what many people believe to be dismissive, if not minimizing the what actually took place during the Holocaust, it calls for her suspension. Now, I hate cancel culture. I don't like, and I wouldn't wish this on anyone, even though I may disagree with certain individuals and their people on certain things. I've definitely had reasons to disagree with Whoopi over a lot of things during this pandemic, for instance, especially, most recently, Joe Rogan and Bill Maher and their position, but wouldn't want to call for, someone losing their job, or at the very least suspended 2-week paid vacation at most, for her. Although I will say I am glad that ABC to some degree is being somewhat consistent, because about a year ago today, Gina Carano got fired from Disney, which is an parent owner of the ABC Corporation, for much less, and actually a very similar context, because Gina was trying to raise awareness to individuals and make them stop and think about what they're doing and the course that humanity was on, by saying that the way things are going, the divide that is existing in society around the world, and the way that we are potentially dehumanizing another group of people who may think differently than others, that was some of what led to the Holocaust in the 1930s, 1940s. Not that it was comparable already to the actual end result events of the Holocaust, but rather we were walking down that path of what led to it. And a lot of people felt offended because how dare you compare anything to the Holocaust, which there's some legitimacy to that, but also Gina meant no disrespect and or to try to minimize what happened during the Holocaust by equating it to what was going on. She was trying to make parallels and warnings to not repeat what led up to that. But I digress. She got let go from her role fired from The Mandalorian for daring to make an Instagram post, just trying to allow people to pause and reflect on the path that they're leading and where it can lead to as it pertains to what led up to the Holocaust. To have done nothing with Whoopi Goldberg would have definitely been hypocritical. And while it's not equal, at least they're staying consistent. But again, I would never wish this on any individual. I think if anything, what we need more is we need to have more conversations with people and stop canceling them, and try to understand where people come from, hear different viewpoints that may be a little different than ours, and not be so quick to be offended and or to cancel. Now, word is that her entire View co-hosts, all of them, Sunny, Ana Navarro, I believe, Joe Behar, they're all upset and over Whoopi Goldberg's suspension over the comments, defending her as not being anti-Semitic, which I find to be very hypocritical of them, considering that they've been fully on the cancel culture bandwagon. So it seems as though they love cancel culture until it affects their own, as if they created a beast that got a little bit too big and has now turned on them. And now they're not for it, because again, just within the past couple of days, they've been all for canceling Joe Rogan for what they define to be misinformation, or they want to label as misinformation, all for censoring him. But then when their own co-host, their own friend, puts out, I hate using this term because it's being used as a form of censorship and canceling out other people's opinions just because it differs from yours, but one can make, using their own definition, what Whoopi Goldberg said was misinformation. Because whether you agree with it or not, at that time, the Nazi Germany's, for instance, viewed the Jews, and the Jews weren't the only people being persecuted. There were thousands of blacks across Europe that were also killed during the reign of Nazi Germany and the rise of the Third Reich. But it still was minimal compared to the deaths of Jews during this time by Nazis as well. But they pretty much viewed anyone not part of their Aryan pure lineage to be an inferior race. Whether you want to accept the race paradigm or not, they saw it as a race issue. A lot of people also identify themselves based upon their Jewish heritage as being part of a group, not just like any other. And if anything, though, so yes, she was wrong in saying it wasn't about race, because for the Nazis and for those who were Jewish and black and across Europe, it was very much about race and or the perception of not being part of the right race at that time. So one can say she was wrong in that respect. Now, I do have to say that what Whoopi's position was, and this is where a lot of the rage comes in, is that she was being dismissive of the events and just saying this was just white on white crime. And that is reflective of a very popular opinion amongst and or viewpoint of those of paler, viewpoint of those of people of color in this country of the United States, and what they have or their perspective of other individuals of paler skin. This reminds me of a bit that Chris Rock did that, again, speaks to how black people view those of paler skin across the world. Take a quick listen.
The Cow Avenue. I ain't never been in the barber shop and heard a bunch of brothers talking about Jews. Black people don't hate Jews. Black people hate white people. We don't got time to dice white people up into little groups. I hate everybody. I don't care if you just got here. Hey, I'm Romanian, you Romanian cracker. We need a fucking lead tub, man.
Now, this could be a learning moment for many people of color in this country to not even necessarily say that they were wrong, but then also try to understand the other perspective. And that is, if that is truly how a lot of people of color in this country view those of paler skin as just all white, where those individuals take pride in their heritage and or national ancestry. And that's actually how most people in Europe also see it. It's not just all one white Aryan nation and or continent. They take pride and distinction of themselves and their culture and their history compared to others. They take pride in being Portuguese, Hungarian, Albanian, Scottish, Irish, British, French, Spanish, Italian, Greek, Russian, Ukrainian. They take a lot of pride in the differences of their backgrounds, Hungarian, from their nationality and or national origin, and differentiating that from the other nations and or groups throughout all of Europe. So that could definitely be a learning moment for instance, people of color in the United States of America to say, you know what, we do need to possibly acknowledge the fact that it's not just all white, but rather specific nationality, specific heritage that deserves to be acknowledged and or understood and or at least have those conversations. Now, I will have to say, and you can disagree if you like, on a bigger level, I agree with Whoopi. Now, Whoopi is also hypocritical in that it would be one thing if this was her position throughout her career, or at least recently, even if she's had a change of heart and said, you know what, we're all one, brother and sisters, one family under the sun. However, recently she has proven to dig in and or believe and hold to tribalistic differentials based upon your skin color, for instance. She has no worries of making things an issue of race when it comes to people of different skin tones. And so this just becomes a hypocritical point for her, and only seeing race based upon skin tone and not based upon one's ethnic identity, one's nationality. But now here's where and she probably wouldn't have gotten in trouble if she had this position from the get-go. And I do somewhat agree with her in that I hate classifications or divisions of people based upon any really criteria. I understand that society has created certain paradigms in which case they need to identify certain groups of people based upon skin color, religion and or faith, your geographic location and or political leaning. But I feel as though, and these are beliefs that have also been shared by a lot of great philosophers throughout our history and current times, like Jiddu Krishnamurti, Bruce Lee, KRS-One, Ralph Smart, in terms of looking at us all as just spiritual individuals having a human experience. This body, this shell, is nothing more than the vehicle we use to have this third dimension experience in this life, but it doesn't define who we are. I think Bruce Lee better articulates it from an interview he did. Take a listen to Bruce Lee's comments and your thoughts on the issue. He can definitely articulate it much better than me. This is from a 1971 interview he did with, I believe, Pierre Burton, if I'm not mistaken.
You still think of yourself Chinese, or do you ever think of yourself as North American?
You know what I want to think of myself? As a human being. Because, I don't want to sound like, as Confucius say, but under the sky, under the heaven, man, there is but one family. It just so happened, man, that people are different.
Okay.
So the idea that, there has always been this system that loves to separate individuals, because if we can be separated by skin color, by religion, by faith, nationality, we can be divided and separated. And or it has always historically been used, whether we realize it or not, as a way of dividing us from other groups of people and creating this tribalism mentality that just breeds conflict, division, and eventually violence against those who are not part of your tribe. And so that does lead to a much bigger discussion. It would be different if that was her mindset from the get-go, because truth is, we are different. We do look different, but honestly, the biggest difference between individuals is really based upon your geographic location where you grew up. Because for me, I may look like this, but I probably do not identify at all and or can relate to someone else with a similar skin tone. I grew up, was born and raised in Philly, currently now in Texas, but have a much different perspective and or upbringing and or way of life than someone who was born and raised here in Texas, or someone who similar skin tone, born and raised in Nebraska or California and or Great Britain. Speaking a different language, different vernacular, have different interests, tastes. It usually depends largely on where you grew up. Marshall Mathers, aka Eminem, though quote unquote white, grew up and was raised in a predominantly black urban Detroit city. And so it's no surprise that his heroes, his musical heroes and their biggest influencers were black hip hop artists. He is just as much hip hop as a Nick Cannon or Puff Daddy and or Tupac Shakur. This is the music he grew up on, grew up loving. It wasn't him trying to be anything other than what his surrounding was, which is what made him. I'm a big believer in nurture over nature, so to speak. And we all have differences based upon where we grew up and how we were raised, differences in how we talk, how we speak. But that shouldn't define us and or keep us from trying to understand one another, get to know one another, and try to come together as one human family. Because when you break us down, at least let's say 100 years from now, everyone living on this planet, unfortunately, as grim as it is to think about that, about 100 years from now, 99.997% of all people currently on this planet and or about to be born, those who are still in the womb, will be dead. Or, high likelihood that 99.997% of all living beings on this planet, whether you are currently born or still in the womb, will be dead. And when the time comes to exhumate, to pull out or exhume your remains, let's say if it's nothing but bones by that point, no one's really going to know or tell whether you were Hispanic and or African, Hungarian, German, whatnot. I mean, they may be able to tell certain things by your dental records and what was available in that particular country, but otherwise, we all are going to ultimately, for the most part, look the same to a great degree. We all bleed. There really is no other race, literally, but the human race, but Homo sapien sapien, since evolving from Homo erectus, Homo neanderthals. But again, there are different ethnicities that we do need to acknowledge, understand, not allowed to, I believe, define us and or segregate and or separate us. But that's a story for another day, much different topic. But again, if that's where Whoopi was going, I'm all for. I mean, I can understand, although she was wrong in trying to dismiss the fact that others were viewing it as a point and or issue of race. I think what also hurt Whoopi Goldberg more so was the fact that she doubled down. It was one thing to make that statement and try to dismiss any play of the view of race or the perception of it was about race to the people involved at the time. She did issue an apology immediately following, but she did then later appear on Stephen Colbert's show later that same night. And again, she essentially doubled down and was pretty much making the stance of, sorry, but not sorry. This is what I believe. This is what I think, and she kind of retracted what she had said in her apology letter to a degree by not conceding the other side. So that's what more or less led to it. A very interesting situation, but it is getting to be a dangerous time when I see freedom of speech being totally derailed and or allowed. And it's interesting to see cancel culture now coming after its own. Let's see if whether or not this will cause people to pause and reflect like, old snap, maybe this isn't good just because it worked for you when you were doing this towards your political enemies. Now it's coming back on them. Hopefully this will be a good time to pause and reassess where cancel culture and the infringements on our freedoms of speech and how this could be negatively affecting society. So that's my video. Let me know what you think. This is Bruce the Boss, and I'm out. Peace.